They thought she was just a poor, uninvited old woman. They didn't know she raised a Navy SEAL. When two security guards tried to force her out of her grandson's graduation ceremony, she quietly stood her ground. Minutes later, 6 elite SEALs walked in, and what they did next silenced the entire arena. Stay with us till the end, because this isn't just about disrespect. It's about honor, sacrifice, and a moment the world will never forget. Michael had always been different from the kids in his neighborhood. While most children were raised by two parents, Michael was raised solely by his grandmother, Evelyn. She was in her late 60s when she took him in, after a tragic car accident claimed the lives of his parents when he was only 5 years old. From that day on, Evelyn became his entire world. She was more than a guardian. She was his family, his support system, his teacher, and his quiet source of strength. Evelyn lived in a small, weather-worn house on the outskirts of town. The paint on the porch peeled away each year, and the roof needed work, but she never complained. Her focus was always on Michael. She worked tirelessly, juggling a job at a laundromat during the day and cleaning offices at night. She wore the same few faded dresses for years, and her shoes were worn thin, but she made sure Michael had clean clothes, packed lunches, and everything he needed to feel like any other child in school. She didn't believe in handouts. She believed in hard work, dignity, and doing what was right, even when no one noticed. As Michael grew older, he began to see the sacrifices Evelyn had made for him. She never talked about it, never made him feel guilty. But he noticed. He noticed how she walked a little slower at night. He noticed how she sometimes skipped dinner, claiming she wasn't hungry. And he noticed how she would pray quietly each night by the window, asking God for strength to keep going. School wasn't always easy for Michael. There were times he struggled to fit in. Other children had more money, better clothes, and parents who came to every game and every recital. Evelyn came to as many events as she could, even if it meant coming straight from work in her uniform, her hands still smelling faintly of bleach. Michael never cared. To him, she looked like a queen. Michael began to excel in high school. He was naturally gifted in math and science, and his discipline was unmatched. He became a quiet leader among his peers, not through loudness or popularity, but through integrity and determination. His teachers took notice. Counselors pushed him to apply for scholarships, and eventually, he earned one that covered tuition at a respected state college. When the acceptance letter came, Evelyn clutched it to her chest and wept silently, overjoyed and overwhelmed. All the years of struggle, the nights of worry, the skipped meals, it had all led to this moment. College was a turning point for Michael. He was finally able to spread his wings, but he never forgot who made it possible. He called Evelyn every evening without fail. Even when he joined the Navy ROTC program and his schedule became packed with drills, classes, and training, he never missed a single call. He sent her part of his stipend so she could ease off on her jobs. At first, she refused, but eventually she accepted, telling herself it was just a little help from her boy. During his sophomore year, Michael faced a difficult decision. While his grades were solid and he was on track to graduate, he felt a calling that went deeper than academics. He wanted to serve, not just because of the ROTC obligations, but because he believed in something larger than himself. He applied to the Navy SEALs program, one of the most grueling and selective paths a person could choose. When he told Evelyn, she simply nodded and said, "If that's where your heart leads you, I'll be praying for you every day." Training was brutal. Many didn't make it through, but Michael did. And through it all, he carried a small photo of Evelyn in his chest pocket, tucked safely inside a plastic sleeve. On the back, she had written in her neat cursive, "You were born strong. Don't forget that." By the time graduation day arrived, Michael had done more than anyone in his family's history. He wasn't just the first to attend college. He was graduating with honors, in uniform, a full Navy SEAL. It was a kind of triumph Evelyn had always dreamed of, not for herself, but for the boys she had raised with faith and sacrifice. As the big day approached, Evelyn spent her last savings on a pair of shoes and a modest dress. She ironed it the night before, carefully folding it over a hanger. Her hands trembled not because of age, but because of the weight of what this moment meant. She was going to watch her grandson, her miracle, walk across the stage, wearing the uniform of a man who had faced fire and didn't flinch. For Evelyn, it wasn't just a ceremony. It was a culmination of every lonely night, every missed meal, every whispered prayer she made while Michael was asleep in the next room. This wasn't just his graduation. It was hers, too. She had raised a man of character, of strength, of service. And nothing, not poverty, not exhaustion, not even the years, had stopped her. The morning of the graduation dawned bright and clear. Evelyn woke up early, long before the sun had climbed high in the sky. She moved slowly, her joints stiff from years of hard work, but her spirit was light. Today wasn't just a milestone. It was a dream realized. She had lived for this moment, saved for it, prayed for it. Every step she took, every wrinkle on her hands, every quiet sacrifice she had made over the years, it all led to this. She dressed carefully in the same floral print dress she had worn to Michael's high school graduation. It was the nicest piece of clothing she owned, and she had taken great care to wash and press it the night before. Her hair was neatly pinned back, and she slipped on the simple shoes she bought months ago at a discount store, setting aside a portion of her grocery budget just to afford them. She held a small bouquet of white daisies, Michael's favorite flower since he was a child. She couldn't afford roses or grand arrangements, but to her, these daisies represented love in its purest form. Evelyn boarded the early bus that would take her across town to the university. She clutched her small purse tightly, inside of which she had tucked a printed invitation Michael had sent her weeks ago. It was creased from being opened and closed so many times. On the back of the envelope, she had written the time and address in her own handwriting, so she wouldn't forget. The ride was long, but she didn't mind. Every bump in the road reminded her of how far they'd come. From the days of patching holes in Michael's shoes with cardboard, to nights spent boiling soup made from scraps. None of that seemed to matter anymore. All she could think about was seeing her grandson walk across that stage, proud and accomplished, wearing the Navy SEAL insignia under his graduation robe. When she arrived, the university campus was already buzzing. Students in gowns laughed and took pictures. Parents beamed with pride, and staff hurried around preparing for the ceremony. Evelyn made her way slowly to the venue, a large arena with thousands of seats. She had never been inside a place so grand. Everything looked larger than life, from the rows of chairs to the banners hanging from the ceilings. She approached the entrance and held out her printed invitation, smiling gently at the young staff member who took it. They pointed her toward the general seating section, but Evelyn hesitated. She had seen a spot close to the stage, an open seat, a perfect view. Surely, she thought, she could sit there just until someone asked her to move. She wanted to see every detail of Michael's face when they called his name. Finding the seat wasn't easy. She walked slowly, clutching her bouquet, weaving between rows of seats, people, and backpacks. Finally, she lowered herself into a chair near the front. Her knees ached, but she didn't show it. She sat upright, hands folded in her lap, bouquet resting gently on her knees. Around her, people chatted and laughed, many of them dressed in designer clothes, holding expensive cameras, and sipping on bottled water. She sat quietly, smiling at anyone who looked her way. Though Evelyn didn't know anyone else there, she felt no discomfort. Her heart was full. She had seen Michael struggle, stumble, and rise again. She had held him through tears, cheered him through milestones, and prayed him through doubt. To see him now, on the edge of becoming everything he worked so hard for, filled her with pride too deep for words. While others around her discussed vacation plans and career prospects, Evelyn simply gazed at the stage. Her mind traveled through memories. Michael as a boy with scraped knees, Michael holding his first report card, Michael leaving for Navy training with a straight back and trembling hands. Each memory was a chapter in their story, and today would be the final page in the book of childhood. She didn't need a camera. Her eyes would remember every second. In her purse, Evelyn had also tucked a folded letter. It was something she had written months ago, unsure if she would ever have a chance to give it to him. In it, she thanked Michael for allowing her to be part of his journey. She wrote that he had given her life meaning, that he had made all her sacrifices worthwhile. She didn't know if she'd have the chance to read it to him, but just in case, she brought it. because today was special. Today, the world would see the boy she raised, a man molded by love, not wealth, and she wanted him to know she had never been prouder. All Evelyn wanted was to witness the moment her grandson crossed the stage and became everything he was meant to be. She had no desire for attention, no longing for acknowledgement. Her joy was simple: to sit, watch, and silently celebrate a victory born from years of quiet resilience. As the arena filled with people and anticipation built, Evelyn remained quietly in her seat near the front. Around her, the atmosphere buzzed with excitement. Parents and family members laughed, posed for photos, waved at their children, and checked the program booklet for the order of the ceremony. Many were dressed in elegant clothes and designer accessories. Some looked around, judging others by appearance. Evelyn, in her simple dress and second-hand shoes, sat unnoticed at first, clutching her daisies and scanning the crowd for a glimpse of Michael. But then, two uniformed security guards began walking down the aisles. Their job was simple: make sure the seats in the front rows were reserved only for VIP guests and family members of high-ranking faculty or donors. With clipboards in hand, they moved with quiet authority, checking names and credentials. When they reached Evelyn's row, they stopped. One of them pointed toward her discreetly, and the other nodded. She had taken a seat, clearly marked reserved, even though she hadn't understood the sign was not meant for her. The guards approached her with polite firmness, asking to see her seating pass or wristband. Evelyn, caught off guard, opened her small purse and carefully pulled out Michael's invitation. It was a printed card, folded and creased from being read so many times, but there was no special pass, no colored sticker, no assigned seat number. It was just a standard guest invite. The guards glanced at it and shook their heads. They told her, quietly but firmly, that these seats were for reserved guests only. She explained that she was a graduate's grandmother, that she had raised him since he was 5, that she had traveled all this way and had nowhere else to sit. She said it all gently, without complaint, simply stating the truth. But policy was policy, and the guards, without malice, insisted she would need to move to general seating, far toward the back of the arena. The people seated nearby turned their heads, their eyes scanning the situation. A few furrowed their brows. Others whispered among themselves. Some simply watched. No one intervened. Evelyn's calm demeanor and humble clothing didn't inspire urgency. She didn't look like someone with influence or power. She wasn't loud, wasn't causing a scene, wasn't someone they feared embarrassing them. She was just an old woman, quietly trying to stay. One of the guards gestured again for her to stand. Evelyn looked down at her flowers, then up at the stage. Her hands trembled slightly. She asked once more, softly, if she could please remain where she was just until her grandson walked the stage. She promised not to take up space long. But the answer didn't change. There was no leniency. The guards had a job to do, and they were doing it by the book. At that moment, something began to shift in the atmosphere. The quiet firmness of the guards, juxtaposed with Evelyn's fragile appearance and unwavering dignity, started to draw more attention. Someone in the next row pulled out a phone, subtly recording. Another turned to whisper to their spouse. A mother with her own child beside her glanced back at Evelyn, then looked away, uncomfortable. Everyone could see something wasn't right, but no one acted. The guards weren't aggressive, but they were unyielding. They asked her to gather her belongings. Evelyn hesitated, glancing once more to the front of the arena where the stage was set for the graduates. She looked around, not to plead, but to search for a friendly face. She saw none. For all the pride and joy that surrounded her, Evelyn had never felt more alone. She hadn't come looking for attention. She hadn't expected special treatment. She hadn't known about seat reservations or wristbands or official passes. She only wanted to sit close enough to see the expression on her grandson's face when he walked across that stage. After everything they'd been through, after every night she spent working while he studied, after every scraped knee she'd bandaged, every prayer she'd whispered, every dream she'd carried for him in her heart, this moment mattered more than any other in her life. But policies don't recognize love. They don't bend for sacrifice. And they certainly don't make exceptions for grandmothers who don't know the rules. The guard stepped back for a moment. as if waiting for her to comply. Evelyn looked down at her hands, still holding the daisies. Her eyes welled with quiet disappointment, not anger. She wasn't the type to argue or protest. She believed in respecting authority, even when it felt unfair. Her whole life had been about endurance, not confrontation. In that moment, as the arena swelled with applause for a group of faculty members walking in, Evelyn sat in silence, her presence unnoticed by most, but now under the subtle gaze of a few. What happened next would not only change the course of the day, but leave an impact none of them could have imagined. The murmur in the arena never fully quieted, but there was a noticeable shift in tone as the incident at the front unfolded. People nearby began to glance sideways more often, their conversations pausing briefly as they tried to make sense of the situation. The sight of two security guards standing over an elderly woman with a fragile frame and kind eyes didn't sit well with some. Others seemed unsure what was happening, torn between curiosity and discomfort. Most chose to say nothing. They assumed the guards must be doing their job. The university had rules, and those seats were marked for special guests. Some whispered assumptions that maybe she had wandered into the wrong section by mistake, or that she didn't belong there. Still, a few others, especially those with elderly family members of their own in attendance, felt something uneasy settling in their chests. They looked at her wrinkled hands gripping a small bouquet of daisies and couldn't help but wonder if this moment, so clearly significant to her, was about to be taken away. Evelyn remained composed. She didn't speak loudly, didn't argue, didn't create a disturbance. She simply asked the guards again if she could stay until her grandson crossed the stage. Her voice was soft, yet heavy with meaning. She didn't offer elaborate explanations or pleas for sympathy. She only mentioned that she had raised a boy being honored that day, raised him from the age of 5, worked every day to support him, and had waited for this one chance to see him shine. But to the guards, her words were not enough. They needed documentation, a wristband, proof, anything that could tie her to a name on their list. Her name wasn't printed in bold on the program. There was no pass hanging around her neck. And to the system they followed, that meant she was no different than anyone else who showed up without proper credentials. Even worse, she had taken a reserved seat, which made their tone shift from polite firmness to subtle insistence. They told her she'd need to move to the general seating section, a place far from the stage, likely behind support columns and hundreds of other attendees. From there, the graduates on stage would appear as distant figures in a sea of black gowns. She might not even recognize Michael from so far back. The people around her could hear bits of the exchange now. Whispers turned into low murmurs. Several heads turned and stayed turned. A young woman sitting a few seats away frowned. A middle-aged man shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Yet no one stood up. No one spoke on Evelyn's behalf. No one challenged the guards. The crowd had grown used to being observers. They watched, recorded, judged, but rarely acted. Evelyn sat still, her bouquet still resting gently in her lap. She didn't want to leave. She wasn't trying to break the rules or cause a disruption. She simply wanted to watch the boy she had raised step into his future. That wish, though small in the eyes of others, was a single reason she'd endured decades of struggle and sacrifice. But in the eyes of the officials tasked with enforcing protocol, her quiet love and determination held no weight. The guards didn't raise their voices. They didn't touch her, but their presence, standing tall in uniform, hovering over a seated old woman, was loud in its own way. Their posture, their clipped tone, their insistence that she move, all spoke volumes. It said, "You don't belong here." It said, "Rules matter more than stories." It said, "Dignity is conditional." What none of them realized, however, was that Evelyn's story wasn't just another sentimental tale. The grandson she had raised wasn't just another student, and the choice to treat her as invisible would not go unnoticed for long. While the arena filled with more families and the air grew dense with expectation, the quiet tension at the front simmered just beneath the surface. The guards waited for Evelyn to gather her things. She looked down again at her invitation. It had Michael's name printed clearly, alongside the university's crest and the date of the ceremony. To her, it was more than paper. It was her ticket to a moment she believed she had earned through years of unwavering love and sacrifice. But bureaucracy doesn't read between the lines. It doesn't see the hands that raised a child, the hours spent cleaning offices, the skipped meals, the silent prayers. It sees only badges and passes. Without them, even the most deserving person becomes invisible. In that moment, Evelyn's story was on the verge of being silenced, tucked away and dismissed, like so many others who don't fit into the official plan. But fate has a way of listening when no one else will. The hush spreading to the crowd, the discomfort in the air, the shared glances, all pointed toward a storm quietly forming. And it wouldn't stay quiet for long. Just as the pressure to move was mounting and the discomfort around her swelled, something shifted in the energy of the space. A rustle from the back of the arena caught the attention of those near the entrance. There was movement, purposeful, synchronized, and unlike the scattered footsteps of the arriving families. It was the sound of boots, polished and steady. The audience didn't notice right away, not in the midst of the pre-ceremony excitement. But the presence approaching was impossible to ignore for long. 6 men entered the arena together, wearing their formal Navy dress uniforms. They walked in a straight line, tall and composed, medals gleaming against their dark coats, white gloves pressed crisply against their sides. Each of them bore the unmistakable insignia of the United States Navy SEALs. Their movements were disciplined, not aggressive, but they carried an undeniable weight. They weren't here to create a scene, but their very existence commanded attention. Heads began to turn. Conversations slowed. Phones were raised, not in confusion, but in admiration. It wasn't common to see a group of decorated Navy SEALs arrive unannounced at a college graduation. People whispered quickly, curious and speculating. Were they here to honor someone? Had a fallen comrade's family been invited? Was this a surprise tribute? No one seemed to know. But the 6 men didn't glance at the crowd. Their focus was singular. They walked with silent precision toward the front section of the arena, the very place where Evelyn remained seated, her posture still dignified, her bouquet still resting in her lap, the security guards now shifting uncomfortably as they noticed a shift in the room. The 6 SEALs paused once they reached the area where the disturbance had quietly unfolded. There was no fanfare, no need for introduction. Their uniforms, presence, and cohesion spoke more than any words could. The weight of their entrance was not in the noise they made, but in the silence they brought with them. Authority did not need to announce itself when it was worn so visibly. In that moment, the crowd's attention, which had been lightly fractured across conversations, programs, and cell phone screens, consolidated in one direction. People began to murmur, not in judgment this time, but in astonishment. These were not just servicemen. These were elite, decorated, respected, revered, the kind of men who had seen things the average citizen could not imagine. And they weren't here as guests of the university. They had arrived with intent. The security guards hesitated, instinctively stepping aside, unsure of how to react. They glanced at one another. Their rigid posture faltered as the realization dawned. Whatever protocol they had followed moments ago was rapidly becoming irrelevant in the face of what was unfolding. There were no instructions in the manual for a group of Navy SEALs walking into a graduation and heading straight toward the elderly woman they had just asked to leave. No one needed to explain what was happening. The truth began to settle across the room like a wave moving row by row. These men weren't just here to attend. They weren't honoring a fallen soldier. They were here because of her. The way they approached, the way they walked with silent reverence and unwavering purpose, left little doubt. They knew exactly who she was, and their presence said more than any defense she could have uttered in her own words. This wasn't about credentials or passes or mark seats. This was about something far greater. It was about respect, loyalty, gratitude. Some people began to rise to their feet, not all at once, but slowly, as though pulled by an invisible force of acknowledgement. Phones came out again, but this time not to shame or record conflict. They were recording history, something unexpected, something powerful, something that defied the rules of ordinary ceremony. The 6 men, each marked by service and sacrifice, were now part of a quiet declaration that some bonds go deeper than bloodlines or formal invitations. They had served together, trained together, fought together, and they had come here for her, Not because they were told to, not because it was scheduled, but because they believed she deserved this moment. Their silent unity was a statement that the woman being questioned and pushed aside was more than someone's grandmother. She was a mother to them all, the one who had fed them during training weekends, who had written to them when they were deployed, who had offered words of comfort when they felt broken by the world. In a time when each of them could have fallen apart, she had held them together with warm meals, quiet prayers, and unwavering support. This wasn't just a graduation anymore. It was a homecoming, a reckoning, a subtle but undeniable course correction in the eyes of those who had stood by silently moments earlier. The guards who had only minutes ago insisted she move were now forced to step back and face something far greater than their authority. The visible, living honor of 6 warriors who had come to say, without needing to say a word, that she belonged. The presence of the 6 Navy SEALs changed the entire tone of the room. What had started as a quiet enforcement of rules had become a moment of reckoning. No longer was Evelyn seen as a forgotten elderly woman who had mistakenly occupied a seat she didn't deserve. In the silence that followed the SEAL's arrival, it became undeniably clear that she was someone extraordinary. The way they positioned themselves, the way they stood with quiet reverence, sent a message that no speech could match. She wasn't just a guest. She was the reason they were there. One of the SEALs stepped forward slightly. He wasn't the tallest or the most decorated, but his body language carried significance. He looked directly at the security guards with an expression that balanced calm professionalism with quiet authority. There was no threat in his eyes, only truth. He spoke just a few words, calmly and clearly, and they echoed louder than any announcement made that day. He identified the woman not just as his grandmother, but as the woman who raised a SEAL. Not just his own blood, but someone who had held up 6 men with her strength, kindness, and faith when the world had tried to break them. The revelation landed like a lightning bolt. The guards, who had only moments ago insisted she relocate to general seating, now stood frozen. The same guest they had nearly removed was now being recognized by a group of America's most elite warriors. It wasn't just a case of mistaken identity. It was a moment of deep, uncomfortable reflection on assumptions, appearances, and the quiet, unseen sacrifices of those who never asked for acknowledgement. The SEAL speaking didn't raise his voice, but the story he told carried weight. He spoke of the early days in training, when he and a few others felt they wouldn't make it. The cold mornings, the sleepless nights, the moments when their minds almost broke before their bodies did. It was Evelyn, he said, who gave them a reason to push forward. During training weekends, she opened her small home to them. She fed them, encouraged them, never asking for anything in return. When one of them was quietly battling depression, it was her handwritten letters that kept him tethered. When another was nearly discharged due to personal struggles, she made late-night phone calls just to remind him he mattered. These weren't just anecdotes. They were the moments that held their unit together. Evelyn had been a quiet, invisible force behind the transformation of boys into men. They had never forgotten her warmth. While the Navy trained their bodies and minds, she healed their spirits. She became their team mother, not by title but by heart. As the SEALs shared more, a few members of the audience began to wipe away tears. The people in the rows nearby leaned forward, listening more closely. Others began to realize the magnitude of what they were witnessing. This wasn't a disruption to a graduation. This was a tribute far more powerful than any speech the university had planned. The guard who had spoken to Evelyn earlier shifted awkwardly. His uniform and clipboard no longer carried the same authority. Protocol had its place, but it could not override reverence. He looked at the elderly woman again, perhaps truly seeing her for the first time, not as someone trying to bend the rules, but as someone whose life had shaped the very character of the man being honored today. The SEAL concluded by stating that Evelyn belonged in the front row, not just as his grandmother, but as the one person whose love had given 6 men the courage to survive what others could not. And she didn't need a wristband or a VIP badge. She had already earned her place through decades of devotion. What followed wasn't dramatic. There was no applause yet, no standing ovation. Just a deep, shared silence, a collective breath held in respect. In that moment, the arena wasn't just a venue for graduation. It became a place where honor was redefined, where the quiet power of a grandmother's love was finally given its rightful place. The rules hadn't changed, but the hearts in the room had. Evelyn had never asked for validation. She hadn't demanded recognition. She had simply shown up as she always had, early, humble, and full of love. And now, 6 men who had faced the fiercest trials of war and training stood by her side, not because they were obligated to, but because they believed she deserved it. She had been their foundation. And in front of everyone, they made it known. The story shared by the Navy SEAL rippled across the auditorium like a quiet storm. What had begun as a simple gesture of solidarity evolved into something much deeper, an acknowledgement of the unseen sacrifices that shaped true warriors. The crowd began to view Evelyn not just through the lens of a grandmother's pride, but through the lens of reverence. She had not only raised her grandson into a Navy SEAL, she had nurtured an entire group of young men, unknowingly molding them into leaders, brothers, protectors. As the SEAL continued to speak, he revealed how each of the men standing beside him had, at one point, found solace in Evelyn's modest home. During their brutal early months of training, weekends off were rare and often filled with anxiety, exhaustion, and homesickness. Many of them came from broken families or distant relationships, with no one to welcome them in the few moments they had away from base. Evelyn's door, however, was always open. She didn't have much, but she shared what she had: a warm meal, a clean space of rest, and words of encouragement that didn't come from training manuals or chain-of-command briefings. She listened without judgment, offered advice without preaching, and comforted them with a gentleness they hadn't realized they needed. They never felt like guests in her home. They felt like sons. He told the audience that on more than one occasion, Evelyn had hosted 3, sometimes even 4 of them in her small living room. Sleeping bags and borrowed blankets filled the floor. Her tiny kitchen worked overtime to feed them all. And somehow, in that limited space with limited resources, she created a sense of home they had never expected to find. It wasn't just the food or the rest. It was the emotional shelter she gave them. Her faith, her steadiness, and her unwavering belief in their potential reminded them of why they were fighting to endure the grueling training ahead. He shared how one of the SEALs standing beside him had considered dropping out after an especially brutal week of drills and psychological testing. His hands were blistered, his body bruised, and his spirit nearly broken. That weekend, he'd visited Evelyn's home, unsure of what he needed, only that he was desperate for something real. She didn't try to fix him. She simply made tea, handed him a Bible, and said, "You're stronger than the storm you're in." Those words stayed with him, and he stayed in the program. Another SEAL nodded as the story was told, his eyes misty with memory. He too had experienced that moment of doubt. Evelyn's faith had become a quiet anthem among them. She didn't preach or push religion, but her belief, so humble and consistent, was contagious. When they were down, she reminded them they were not alone. When they lost their way, she reminded them who they were becoming. And when they made it through, she was the first to cheer, even from a distance. What struck the audience was that Evelyn had done all of this without ever seeking recognition. She had no idea at the time that her grandson and his fellow SEAL candidates would go on to complete one of the toughest military training programs in the world. She wasn't trying to shape Navy SEALs. She was simply doing what she'd always done, offering love and safety to those who needed it. The stories continued, each one a thread woven into a larger tapestry of grace, humility, and strength. The image of grandmother quietly supporting 6 elite soldiers stood in sharp contrast to the typical narratives of toughness and grit. Yet everyone now understood that Evelyn had embodied a different kind of strength, one that never sought the spotlight, yet helped shape warriors from the inside out. For many in the crowd, her impact stirred something personal. Parents thought about the influence of quiet caretakers in their own families. Veterans reflected on homes and hands that had helped them survive the chaos of duty. Young graduates saw a new definition of success, not in titles or degrees, but in how one shows up for others. By the time the SEAL finished speaking, Evelyn's story had transcended the narrow lens of ceremony. She was no longer just someone's grandmother in a simple dress with a bouquet of daisies. She had become a symbol of the unseen backbone behind great accomplishments, the strength behind the uniform, the love behind the medals, the sacrifice behind the triumph. Her quiet acts of kindness had grown into pillars of resilience for 6 of the nation's most elite servicemen. And in that moment, the entire auditorium knew they weren't just honoring a graduate. They were bearing witness to the legacy of a woman whose compassion had built warriors, not through orders, but through faith, not through money, but through presence, not through grand gestures, but through consistent, enduring love. The silence that had once filled the auditorium was now replaced by waves of soft murmurs and hushed awe. Word had spread across rows like wildfire about the woman who had nearly been removed from the ceremony, and about the 6 Navy SEALs who had shown up not for show, but for her. The atmosphere had transformed. Where once people had turned away or scrolled through their phones waiting for names to be called, now they were fully present. The focus was no longer on the stage alone, but on a moment that had touched something deeper in everyone watching. The dean, upon hearing what had transpired, made a quiet but firm decision. The request came down the line quickly. Evelyn was to be seated where she belonged, in the front row, not just as a grandmother, but as a guest of honor. The guards who had previously tried to move her stood off to the side now, their authority replaced by humility. They made no further attempts to speak. No more rules were recited. No more policies defended. Respect had spoken louder than protocol. Several university staff members stepped forward to assist Evelyn, but it was the 6 SEALs who moved with quiet purpose, forming a protective circle around her. Their movements were deliberate, respectful, and wordless. They didn't need instruction. They knew why they were there and what she meant to them. As they guided her gently to the newly cleared front row seat, people stood. It began slowly, 1 or 2, then rows at a time. A standing ovation, not for a celebrity, not for a politician, but for a woman whose story had remained invisible until now. As Evelyn was seated, she looked neither overwhelmed nor proud in the way one might expect. Her expression was calm, her hands folded around a bouquet of daisies she still held tightly. Her eyes shimmered, not from surprise, but from quiet understanding. This moment wasn't about glory. It was about being seen, not for what she had, but for what she had given. Cameras clicked all around. What had begun as a private act of loyalty between SEALs and their mother figure had now become a moment of national significance. People shared photos online with captions that praised not just her dignity, but the humility and gratitude of the men who stood with her. Viewers at home would later watch the clip and weep, inspired by a display of respect rarely seen in such a raw and authentic form. Even the graduates, who had been waiting to hear their names called, were now standing taller. They understood that what was happening wasn't a detour from the ceremony. It was a lesson far more important than any speech delivered that day. They saw the value of sacrifice, the depth of service, and the power of humility. Evelyn represented something their textbooks never taught: the quiet resilience that holds families, communities, and futures together. As the national anthem began to play, the 6 SEALs stood at attention around her. Their posture was flawless, their eyes fixed ahead. Around them, thousands joined in song, but it felt different now. The anthem wasn't just background music. It was part of the tribute, an acknowledgement of all the uncelebrated hands and hearts behind every soldier, every graduate, every success. In a space meant to honor educational achievement, Evelyn reminded everyone that not all diplomas are printed on paper. Some are earned in sleepless nights and aching backs, in held-together homes and faith that never wavers. Her diploma was her grandson, a man in uniform, decorated and disciplined, molded by her love. What touched people most was how natural it all felt. The SEALs never boasted. Evelyn never demanded. The moment didn't come with speeches or fireworks. It came with silence, presence, and reverence. The kind of tribute that moves people not because it's loud, but because it's undeniably true. Families began whispering stories to each other, of their own grandmothers, of sacrifices made behind closed doors. Faculty members, some of whom had only met Michael briefly, now looked at him differently, not as a student, but as a living testament to what love and discipline can build when no one is watching. Even the university president, seated on stage, looked visibly moved. He would later ask for a meeting with Evelyn, to personally thank her and include her name in the formal recognition of the day's events. But Evelyn didn't seek the spotlight. She sat quietly, hands resting on her knees, the daisies gently wilting in her lap. Her grandson was about to walk across the stage, and that's all she had come to see. No one could take that moment from her now. She had walked a long road to get here, one filled with hardship, quiet endurance, and faith, and now, with thousands of eyes on her and 6 seals by her side, she had finally arrived. The moment finally arrived when Michael's name was called. His full name echoed across the auditorium, followed by a string of honors and distinctions. But it wasn't the titles or achievements that caught people's attention. It was the way he walked, with quiet confidence, wearing both his graduation gown and Navy SEAL uniform underneath. The SEAL insignia gleamed from his chest, not as a badge of pride, but as a symbol of the path he had taken. One forged not in comfort, but in sacrifice. As he crossed the stage, the audience erupted in applause, louder than for any other graduate before him. The ovation wasn't only for his academic achievements or his military service. It was for the story that had unfolded in the hearts of every person in that arena. It was for the grandmother who raised him, for the 6 SEALs who stood beside her, for the invisible battles fought far from public view, in quiet kitchens and on late nights filled with doubt and determination. Michael didn't stop to soak in the praise. He didn't wave or pose. As he accepted his diploma, he turned toward the front row, where Evelyn sat holding her bouquet of daisies, now slightly wilted but still tightly gripped in her hands. The look in her eyes spoke volumes. Pride, yes, but also peace. The kind that comes when a lifelong promise has been fulfilled. He raised his hand in a sharp, perfect salute, not to the stage, not to the crowd, but to her. A gesture of absolute honor, respect, and gratitude. In that simple salute, he gave her back every sleepless night she endured, every double shift she worked, every tear she wiped from his childhood face. The arena fell silent again. The applause faded into awe. It was no longer a celebration of a graduation. It had become a tribute to the roots that raised him. Many in the audience had come to celebrate degrees, milestones, and future careers. But what they witnessed transcended the usual excitement of a university ceremony. They had seen love turned into legacy. They had seen service rewarded not with medals or applause, but with dignity, the kind of dignity that can't be bought, only earned over a lifetime of silent giving. The moment was later shared widely across social media and news outlets. Photos of Evelyn surrounded by 6 SEALs went viral. Viewers around the world watched the clip of Michael's salute to his grandmother, tears welling in their eyes. Comment sections filled with stories from people who have been raised by their own grandmothers, single parents, aunts, or guardians who sacrificed everything without ever asking for recognition. It wasn't the military that made the moment powerful. It wasn't the diploma or the grandeur of the event. It was the way love had endured, shaped, and eventually stood in full view of the world. Evelyn, who had never stepped into the spotlight before, had become a quiet symbol of strength, not the kind measured by muscles or rank, but by resilience, humility, and grace. In the days that followed, the university sent her a personal letter of gratitude, along with a framed honorary recognition of her contributions, not just as a guest, but as someone who helped shape the character of one of their most honorable graduates. Evelyn declined a television interview, preferring instead to return home to her quiet life. She said she didn't do anything special. She just did what any grandmother would do. But those who had seen what happened knew better. They knew that behind every soldier, every graduate, every great achievement, there is someone who sacrificed in silence, someone who held things together when they were falling apart, someone who gave without taking, someone who loved without needing to be seen. Michael's graduation would be remembered not just for the diplomas awarded or the applause echoing through the arena, but for the reminder that greatness isn't always born in the spotlight. Sometimes it begins in the most ordinary homes, with the most overlooked people doing the most extraordinary things simply out of love. And Evelyn, with her daisies, her simple dress, and her unwavering heart, reminded the world that sometimes the true heroes don't wear medals. They raise them. If this story moved you, don't forget to share, and subscribe for more powerful true life moments that remind us of the strength behind silent sacrifices. Because sometimes heroes wear uniforms, and sometimes they wear aprons, hold daisies, and quietly change the world. Thanks for watching, And remember, respect is earned not by titles, but by love, loyalty, and the lives we live along the way.